Hello everyone, welcome back to Power to Change, a series of sometimes you win and sometimes you learn. I hope you're learning from this series and I hope that you're enjoying our journey. I have to admit, I love the book for which I'm getting the information from, and that is John Maxwell's book, Sometimes You Win and Sometimes You Learn. Sometimes you learn, excuse me. The whole book, really, it's compelling, and it's really epitomizes my own journey in life. We cannot succeed if we don't learn from our challenges. So let me introduce myself. I'm Bob Bauer, your host. I'm also the founder of Power to Change, LLC, and Warriors Heart USA, which this is a production of. We believe that a man's soul is worth fighting for. But anyhow, before we get started, let's kind of recap what we talked about last week. And last week we spoke about reality, how important it is to deal with reality and not deal with a fantasy world. Last week I mentioned the story of an 11-year-old Jewish girl that had to deal with the invasion of Nazi Germany into her country of Poland. She faced the threat of death for being a Jew. She faced the loss of her family. And yet, in spite of all these challenges, she was able to survive, come to America, get married, and eventually was convinced to share her story with others. She was able to survive because she understood her situation. She understood her reality. The three things that we learned is life is difficult. Life is difficult for everyone. Life is more difficult for some than others. We can't escape life's problems, its failures or its losses. No one can. So I encourage you not to make life harder for yourself. But hey, let's go ahead and jump into today's topic. And today's topic is responsibility, which is the first step of learning. It is said that responsibility is the most important ability that a person can possess. Would you agree or disagree? Take a moment, think about that. It is said that responsibility is the most important ability that a person can possess. If you don't have responsibility, you actually give up control of your life. Truett Cathy, who is the founder of Chick-fil-A, is often heard saying, "If it's to be, it's up to me." Pretty catchy phrase, because when we take responsibility for our lives, our actions, and our mistakes, and growth, it puts us in a place where we're always able to learn. Now, one thing that we learn every time we fail is that we can put ourselves in a painful yet profitable place of taking responsibility for our actions and mistakes so that we can take the right actions towards success, our success. Or we can ignore the mistake altogether. We can try to avoid it, where we'll make excuses for our own failures. If we take responsibility, we can learn. We can learn from our own mistakes. When we learn from our mistakes, we tend not to get caught up in a whirlpool of failure. I'm not sure many will remember the story of a homeless panhandler back in the 90s. His name was Ted Williams. He had a golden voice. He used to stand in the street and he would panhandle. One day a driver came up and said that he wanted him to say something as he recorded him in order for him to give money in exchange. That driver made the film, the video, posted it on YouTube. Within a matter of days, news outlets across the country were trying to reach Ted Williams. And no, he was not the famous baseball player. Ted was recognized for his golden voice. But Ted didn't have a golden life. You know, when Ted was younger, his mom bought him a boom box. In my days, that's what we called them. They were just large radios. But Ted would listen to the DJs every night, and he would dream about becoming a DJ someday. So at the age of 17, he quit high school and he joined the Army to try and make his dream a reality because he wanted to become a communication specialist. However, after Army basic training, because he did not know how to type, which was a requirement to become a communications specialist, Ted became a mechanic instead. He was assigned in South Korea, where Ted began to drink heavily and catching a bad attitude along with it. Unfortunately for Ted, he was eventually booted out of the Army with a bad conduct discharge. After getting out of the Army, he moved to South Carolina, where he was learning the DJ business. He started off at the bottom and began to move his way up. He was blessed to marry an old gal from his high school days. Now, as fortune would have it, a new radio station came to town, and, well, Ted got the gig. He became their DJ. He worked very hard at his craft. He would show up early, he would stay late. The sad note in Ted's song, though, was he never stopped drinking. And his bad behavior reared its ugly head one too many times. So, soon enough, Ted lost his dream job. He was fired. Well, as a result of that, he began to drink heavier, and then he began to smoke marijuana, which led him to get involved in crack cocaine. Ted's life went from bad to worse. He went from poverty to homelessness. Yeah, he was homeless, sleeping in the woods or on strangers' couches and in crack houses. Ted was slowly killing himself while lying to himself. Now, by the time he was discovered on the streets panhandling this last time, he was trying to change his lifestyle. So when this Good Samaritan found him, made his video, and put it on YouTube, the whirlwind fame actually didn't help Ted. You see, Ted hadn't taken responsibility for his addiction. He was still lying to himself. His fame, though, got him onto the stages of the Dr. Phil show, which offered him a chance at rehab. But Ted only committed to the program for 12 days and then walked away from it. Now, in a physical sense, Ted had been rescued, taken off the street, provided a job, a place to live. Ted was still trapped in his head. He had to change his mindset in order to be released from his prison. So with his tail between his legs, Ted reached out to Dr. Phil again for help that he walked away from. And for the first time in Ted's life, Ted was taking responsibility for his actions and his addiction. Today, Ted Williams is drug and alcohol free. Why? He took responsibility. Let me ask you a question. Can you identify with Williams? Have you ever been in a place where you did not take responsibility for your actions? I know I've been there. I wasn't stuck on alcohol or drugs, but I was stuck on lying to myself about my life. One of the best known characteristics that I had was I ran away from my problems. And every time I ran away, I left a lot of pain and rejection behind me. I refuse to take responsibility for my own actions. This always resulted in me seeing myself as a loser and a failure. I can still remember times repeating the same mistakes over and over again and standing there and asking myself, why am I doing this? Why am I always in the same place? I've come a long ways since those days, but even today when I start new projects, I begin to question myself. Who's going to trust me? Who's going to trust me to do this? You see, one of the things that I was doing, I saw a pattern in my life that, number one, I was developing a victim mentality. I really resembled that characteristic. I blamed everyone, everything for my failures. My grandparents, my parents, my former wife, her parents, former classmates, former teachers, the army. It was never my fault. The victim mentality has become a pandemic even in our own country today. You don't believe me? Turn on the news. Read social media. Let me give you an example of how we are encroaching on victim mentality. There's a school system in Northwest Virginia that a few years ago, in order to not have children feel like they were losers and failures, they took away the grading system in the public schools, so they will never know if they fail. Another challenge in that very same school system is when you're in middle school and you fail a test, you can take it as many times as you need to pass it. We're just not learning responsibility. My grandparents are a great example of taking responsibility and teaching it to their kids. My mom's parents immigrated to the United States in the 1920s from Mexico. My grandmother at the time was 15 years old, and my grandfather was 26. My grandfather worked on the American railroad system until he was 32 years old, where he had been permanently disabled. Now, neither one of my grandparents had an education, and each one struggled with the English language. But they raised 12 kids in an 850 square foot house. And the kids were raised during the Great Depression. They struggled to make it. Now, the other challenge was they were Mexicans. And they struggled with racism and bigotry in their own community. However, none of my grandparents or my aunts and uncles were ever on food stamps or government assistance. 5 of my uncles and my mother served in the United States military. My 5 uncles were combat veterans. I have an aunt that worked at a senior level of a major bank. Another one was in the leadership role of a major data collection firm. I had another aunt that worked for the federal government at a senior level. My grandparents taught my mom and her siblings responsibility. They never once blamed someone else for any of their failures. And they had a lot to face growing up. They each faced their challenges and each accepted responsibility and each learned from them. But today, unfortunately, we have an everybody gets a trophy mentality culture. We are recognizing the people for showing up, but not for succeeding. I believe when we learn to develop the gratitude for what we have and take responsibility, we will experience a turnaround. But another thing that by not taking responsibility that I dealt with, I had an unrealistic perspective on how life works. I was 17 when I got married the first time. Up until the point I got married, I thought I knew it all. But the minute I became a husband and a pending father, I realized I didn't know how to be either one of them. I was a high school graduate about to become a father. The only skill I had was labor. I remember sitting one day in my car asking myself, how am I going to support a family? Then I remembered a friend of mine who was in a similar situation. He joined the Air Force, which gave him a guaranteed job, guaranteed health care, provided him with housing. He had a job for 4 years. I chose that route myself. When I did that, when I joined the Air Force, I thought, okay, life is going to be pretty easy here. But it wasn't. I wanted life to be fair and pain-free, but it wasn't. Because you see, if life was fair, the marriage to my high school sweetheart and the mother of my child never would have ended. If life was fair, I would have never walked out on my kid's life. If life was fair, I would have never tried to end my own life. If life was fair, my 48-year-old father never would have contracted brain cancer and died as a result of it. If life was fair, I would have not been estranged. I would not have been estranged from my family for almost 23 years. Benjamin Franklin once said, "Those things that hurt instruct." The statement is true. Think about it. If you take the time and invest the effort to understand how life works and accept it, Benjamin Franklin's statement is true. Don't focus on why things happen, because when we do, we are better off learning how things happen. When we learn from our battles, we are stronger for the next battles ahead. I was constantly engaged in blamestorming as well. Blamestorming is the result of failing to take responsibility. I was always looking for a scapegoat. You want to see blamestorming in action? Just turn on the news or go to social media, as I said earlier. Each are dripping with blamestorming. As a cop, I heard blamestorming all the time. No one was willing to take responsibility. I don't want to sound sanctimonious here, because I was one of the best at blamestorming. As I said earlier, I blamed everyone and everything for my problems in my life. It took me some time to change my mindset in order to understand and take responsibility. You see, I was like Ted Williams. I had to accept responsibility in order to experience change. But when you don't take responsibility, you give away choice to control your life. You give away the choice to control your life. We've all experienced that. Who do you think has responsibility for the outcome of your life? Is it you? Or do you think it's an outside force and you have nothing to do with how your life turns out? Psychologists have been known to say there are two types of people in the world. There's one that has an internal point of control, where this type of person depends on themselves. Well, there's others that present possess an external point of control where they blame others when things go wrong. The people that take responsibility are more content as they learn from their mistakes and keep growing and improving. Remember, taking responsibility for our lives is a choice. It's our choice. This doesn't mean that we control everything in our lives. It's just humanly impossible. But we can take responsibility for ourselves, and every choice that we have, we will be content. And as for me, I choose life, my life. Because you see, God asked no man whether he will accept life. That's not a choice. You got to take it. The only choice is how. So how will you approach your life? When I refused to take responsibility for my life, I eliminated any possibility of growth for success. When we fail to take that responsibility, we develop a victim mentality, embrace an unrealistic perspective of how life works. We engage in blamestorming, and we give away the choice to control our lives. But we also eliminate any real possibility of growth for success. And that is the real tragedy of failing to be a responsible person. Our life isn't a sprint. It's a journey. We have to approach our life with a long-term mindset. It's been said that excuses are like exit ramps on the way. We can take the easy route and get off the path, but when we do that, we slip into that whiny stage, blaming everyone else. However, if you want to do something, we take responsibility and we stay on that path that leads to living a life that matters. So what happens when we learn to be responsible? Tim Hansel, the author of You Gotta Keep Dancing, says, pain is inevitable, but misery is optional. So with a similar thought process, it can be said when it comes to taking responsibility, losses are inevitable and excuses are optional. When we move from excuses to responsibility, our lives begin to change dramatically. When we take our first steps in learning, we take responsibility for ourselves. We take responsibility for our learning. William Raspberry, who was a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, offered this up as advice. He said, if you want to be thought as a solid, reliable pillar of your community when you are 50, you can't be irresponsible, corner-cutting exploiter at 25. The time to worry about your reputation by deciding who and what you are and by keeping that lofty vision of yourself in your mind, even when you're having a rip-roaring good time. So let me be honest with you. If you take responsibility when you're younger, you have a better chance of gaining wisdom as you get older. However, for some, like me, it just takes a little longer to learn that. But when we accept responsibility, we also see things in their proper perspective. We are never more discontent with others than when we are discontented with ourselves. Henry Frederick Emile said that. Now, taking responsibility is not taking ourselves that seriously. There are people who are crushed by their losses. In fact, some say that their loss ruined their life. I remember there was a time that had a relationship that failed badly. And I said that relationship destroyed me. Emotionally, intellectually. And I blamed someone else for my problems in the future when the truth was I was really ruining my own life by the choices I made. We have the power to choose how we think. We are in control of our choice. The best learners are those who do not see their losses as permanent. Rather, they see them as temporary. You know, when we take responsibility, we stop repeating our failures. We get off the hamster wheel. Do you know what the major difference between people who succeed and those who do not? People who succeed stop repeating their failures because they learn from them. For the longest time, I was not one of them. I repeated my same failures over and over again because I never took responsibility. However, when I learned to take responsibility for my own actions and started to learn from them, I saw a sea change. Let me give you an example of learning from our errors. And it is so simple, it's amazing. Think about a baby. When a baby's born, they depend on everything. You have to change their diaper to bring them comfort. You have to put them to bed and get them out of bed. You have to feed them. You have to bathe them. You basically carry them from point A to point B. You are their transportation unit. And then there comes a time when they hit that exploratory phase of life. They spend a lot of time on their stomachs or their backs, but they begin to explore by rocking back and forth, rocking back and forth. And they're learning from this to the point where they roll over on their stomachs. They learn from their mistakes. Then one day they decided they want to get around on their own. They start to scoot. Then they start to crawl. And then one day you see them standing next to a table, a chair, a sofa. And they begin to walk from one end to another. Then they look adventurous and they see another piece of furniture for which they have to let go of their primary piece of furniture they're holding on to in order to walk a few steps to the other piece of furniture. Now, they may fall, but they pick themselves back up, they balance themselves, and they begin to move. They learn from their mistakes. Pretty soon, they are walking on their own. The same thing applies when riding a bike. I remember with my kids, when I first got them their first bikes, I put training wheels on them, and I got them used to the training wheels. And I remember them riding down the driveway, bouncing from one training wheel to the other on the back, watching them do that as they caught the balance of the bike. And then one day we took the training wheels off. And we were in the middle of the street, and I'm pushing them down the street, holding on to them. And then pretty soon I let go of them. They learn from their mistakes, from falling on the bike, getting back up, and beginning to pedal again. That's what life is like for us. We learn from our mistakes. If you take responsibility for your actions and you learn from them, you can't fail continually. Remember, to win, you can't keep attempting the same thing over and over again, thinking you're going to succeed. I remember in the Army once, I had a first sergeant tell me that the definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over again, however, expecting a different outcome every time we tried. You must stop, take responsibility for your choices, reflect on what went wrong, reflect on what went right, make adjustments, and try again. When we do that, we grow stronger. A former First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt is known for saying this: you gain strength, courage, and confidence by every experience in which you really stop to look fear in the face. You're able to say to yourself, I have lived through this horror. I can take the next thing that comes along. You must do the thing you think you cannot do. In other words, Mrs. Roosevelt was saying, one, face your fear. Move forward despite the experience. And in doing so, you become stronger. If you keep doing the things you ought to do, the day will come when you get to do the things you want to do. It is the ability to take responsibility for our errors and learn from them. You then become the person you are created to be with the purpose intended for you. When we do that, we back up our words with our own behavior. My dad used to say to me all the time, Bobby, don't tell me what you're going to do. Show me what you've done. In other words, put your words into action, because your actions speak louder than your words. Your words back up your behavior. Sign your work at the end of the day. If you can't do that, find a new profession. When I was in the Army, I had the honor of attending jump school, where they taught you how to deploy from an aircraft on a parachute successfully. Now, I had to depend on a rigger, a person who packed the parachutes, to ensure that my chute was packed properly and I could deploy from an aircraft safely. Something you should know about riggers is they often are randomly told to grab a parachute at times and deploy from a plane. In other words, they had to sign their name on the chute they packed, because you see, they had to be confident that they did their work correctly. Can you sign your name to your product, to your work at the end of the day? In this phase of learning, I know you will face reality and that you will take responsibility, because if you don't, you can't succeed. So, I'm going to wrap up this episode this week. And I'm going to tell you, you can find this on YouTube, on the YouTube channel Power to Change. And if you ever miss an episode, that's where we are placing them. But before I go, I want to tell you about a campaign that Warriors Heart USA and Power to Change is deploying. It's called Random Acts of Kindness, and it runs from May 13th to July 1st of 2021. Now, this is it. I'm challenging you to commit a random act of kindness once a day for the next 50 days. Yes, that's right. I want you to commit 50 random acts of kindness over 50 days. It can be anything that will bring impact in somebody's life, your community, and even your own life, but you do it without considering anything in return. You can join us on our Facebook page at Warriors Heart USA. You can also follow us on our webpage at www.pwr2chg.net, where you can learn a lot more about what we're doing in the community and a lot of our programs. So, until then, stand strong and be courageous. This is Power to Change, and I'm Bob Bauer.